Picture this. It's 32 degrees outside. No power, no ice, no refrigerator running. And this pot of tomatoes, peppers, and leafy greens has been sitting here for 18 days without going bad. That's not a trick. That's physics. And the device keeping that food cold is 2 clay flower pots, a bag of sand, some water, and a piece of wet cloth. Total cost, about $6. No moving parts, no electricity, no maintenance beyond pouring a cup of water on it twice a day. I'm going to show you exactly how to build one, and I'm going to be honest with you about when it works brilliantly and when it doesn't, because the honest version of this story is genuinely impressive enough that it doesn't need any exaggerating. You already know how sweating works. That's your body using the exact same principle. When sweat evaporates off your skin, it pulls heat with it. The phase change from liquid to vapor requires energy, and that energy comes from your body's surface, which is why you feel cooler. The hotter and drier the air, the faster the evaporation, the more cooling happens. Athletes in dry climates sweat and cool down faster than athletes in humid ones. Same principle. What you're building is a device that does the same thing on a larger scale around a container of food. Water and wet sand evaporates through a porous outer clay pot. That evaporation pulls heat from the inner pot and everything inside it. The inner temperature drops. The food stays cold. With a steady flow of dry air and regular watering, the inner pot can reach temperatures as low as 4.4 degrees Celsius, confirmed by testing data from multiple engineering sources. That's cold enough that harmful mesophilic bacteria significantly slow their growth. That's the temperature range where food preservation actually happens. And here's the part that stops me every time. Archaeologists have found evidence that Egyptians were using evaporative cooling as far back as 2500 BCE frescoes from the Old Kingdom show slaves fanning porous clay water jars, increasing airflow to speed evaporation and cool the contents. They didn't have a formula or a physics textbook. They noticed that certain pots kept water cooler than others, and that fanning them helped. That observation was so useful, it persisted for thousands of years across dozens of cultures. Egypt, Persia, India, Spain, Australia, until cheap electric refrigeration arrived in the 20th century and most of the world forgot it was ever a solved problem. Then, in 1995, a university teacher in northern Nigeria named Mohammed Bah Abba, who came from a family of clay pot makers, looked at the food spoilage crisis in his region and remembered what the old pots could do. He hired local pot makers and produced 5,000 units. He distributed them across 11 northern states. The device extended the shelf life of perishables from days to weeks. He won the Rolex Award for Enterprise in 2001 and used the $75,000 prize to expand distribution across Nigeria and into Cameroon, Niger, Chad, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. A teacher, clay pots, sand and water, and the shelf life of food in rural communities transformed. Here's what you need. 2 unglazed terracotta flower pots. One larger, one smaller, same shape. The smaller one needs to fit inside the larger with a gap of roughly 2 to 3 centimeters on all sides for the sand layer. The pots must be unglazed. Glazed pots don't allow water to pass through the clay, which stops the evaporation that does all the work. Unglazed terracotta pots are standard at any garden center. A 6 or 8 inch pot and a 10 or 12 inch pot is a good starting size. Cost, $3 to $5 for the pair. Sand, coarse builder's sand or regular play sand, enough to fill the gap between the 2 pots. A small bag from a hardware store is about $2, or you can use sand from your garden or a nearby site. Not fine dust, actual granular. Sand that holds water without compacting into mud. Water, rainwater or tap water, enough to wet the sand thoroughly and keep it damp, free. A piece of cloth or burlap for the top. Old towel, piece of hessian, anything absorbent. Free if you have any fabric in the house. That's it. $6 at most, assuming you're buying everything new. Here's how it goes together. Plug the drainage hole in the bottom of the outer pot with a small piece of clay, cork, or a folded piece of cloth. You need the sand layer to hold water rather than drain immediately. Place a thin layer of sand in the bottom of the outer pot. Set the inner pot inside it, centered, so the rims sit at roughly the same height. Fill the gap between the 2 pots with sand all the way up, packing it gently but not tightly. You want it dense enough to hold water, but loose enough for air to move through. Pour water slowly and evenly over the sand until it's fully saturated and won't absorb anymore. The sand should feel consistently wet throughout, like a wrung-out sponge. Put your food in the inner pot. Place your damp cloth over the top of both pots as a lid. Set the whole thing in a shady, well-ventilated spot. In the shade on a breezy day, the evaporation rate is highest and the cooling is most effective. Add water to the sand twice a day, morning and evening. Keep the cloth damp. That's the entire maintenance routine. Here's the one thing people get wrong. They put it in the wrong spot. A Zeer pot in direct sunlight heats up faster than the evaporation can cool it down and barely works at all. A Zeer pot in a closed, airless space has nowhere for the humid air to go, and the evaporation slows to nothing. You need shade and airflow simultaneously, under a tree, on a shaded porch, in a covered outdoor area where air moves freely. That combination is what makes the physics work. Get the placement right, and the results are remarkable. Get it wrong, and it feels like it doesn't do anything. Now, the honest part, because skipping it would be doing you a disservice. This device works best in hot, dry climates with humidity below about 40%. In those conditions, it's extraordinary. The drier the air, the faster the evaporation, the colder the inner pot gets. In a Canadian summer or the Pacific Northwest where humidity runs 60 to 80% on a typical day, evaporative cooling is significantly less effective. You'll still get some temperature drop, but not the 20 to 28 degree reduction documented in dry desert conditions. It's the difference between a device that keeps tomatoes fresh for 18 days and one that extends them by 4 or 5. It's also not suitable for meat, dairy, or anything requiring sustained temperatures below about 20 degrees Celsius in a humid climate. For vegetables, fruit, herbs, and root crops in a dry or semi-arid environment, it's one of the most effective off-grid food preservation tools ever developed. The thing about this that keeps sitting with me is the scale of what Mohammed Bah Abba actually did. He didn't invent the physics. He didn't discover evaporative cooling. He looked at a problem. Rural communities with no electricity, no refrigeration, and catastrophic food spoilage rates, and recognized that a 4,000-year-old solution was still sitting there, waiting to be remembered. He used local materials, local labor, and local knowledge to build something that changed the daily food security of entire communities. The Rolex Award, the $75,000 immediately spent on distribution, the expansion into 5 countries. Then the internet discovered it. Permaculture communities started building them in backyards in Arizona and New Mexico, and the design quietly spread to every corner of the off-grid world. Because it works. Because clay and sand and water and shade are available almost everywhere. And because 4,000 years is a long time for a technology to survive, and things that survive that long usually deserve the attention. I don't know what your situation is or why you're watching this. Maybe you're building towards something off-grid, and food storage is the gap you haven't solved yet. Maybe the power went out recently, and you want options that don't depend on ice. Maybe you live somewhere hot and dry, and this solves an actual daily problem. Maybe you just like knowing that a school teacher in Nigeria and the ancient Egyptians figured out the same thing 4,000 years apart and were both right. It doesn't matter. It works either way. Now you know how. Take care and see you in the next one.